the noise that your car is making is not the problem, right? It's a symptom of a problem, right?
But that's the difference. The better you are at your job, the better you are at diagnosing the actual problem.
Hello, and welcome to You Are a Storyteller. In this episode, Brian and Jesse discuss what sets a professional apart from an amateur. While amateurs create trendy work to boost their own egos, professionals make objectively good work that serves something bigger than themselves and can stand the test of time.
Okay, on this week's episode, we're going to talk about the difference between an amateur and a professional, right? Now, my knee-jerk reaction to the word amateur is I don't like it, because I don't like the, there's the brilliant people, and there's right? Like, that's my knee-jerk reaction, but I don't know of a better word than this. Like, we see this all the time. Like, we've talked a bunch about like shows like Columbo. Like, I'm going through Frasier right now, where you go like, these are professional writers. You go like, this is professional. Then I watch something else. I was like, I don't know what that is, but that's not professional. Mm-hmm. Whatever that thing is what we're going to talk about. Because remember, people see through contrast, and so I was hoping that we could talk to you today about kind of what are the markers of a professional, and then the opposite of that. The goal of this is for the people at home to be able to hear this episode and go, oh, crap, I do that. Mm-hmm. I need to figure out how to, think about what I do in maybe a little different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this week's episode, we're going to talk about the difference between an amateur and a professional. So right out of the gate, Brian, you told a story a long time ago. I think, was it your stepdad was talking about what makes you a professional?
Yeah, I was asking what made somebody a professional. I was a kid, and I was like, "What's the difference?" Because they're like Olympic athletes are amateurs, right? Right? I'm like, "What?" I didn't understand it. So I'm like, "What's the difference between an amateur and a professional?" And his definition was, a professional gets paid for what they do. And that was my definition for a while, but then what I came to realize is that that's not true at all. That a person becomes a professional, then they get paid for what they do. I think a lot of times people think there's a magic thing when people pay you, or you get into, like, I talked to a young student who wanted to work at Pixar. And she's like, she knew I had done some work with them, and she's like, "Oh, I want to work at Pixar. How do I do that?" I'm like, "Well, what do you do? What do you want to do?" "Well, I don't know." Well, they don't hire people just because they want to work at Pixar, right? Like, you have to do something. You have to bring something to the table. Why is it that you would think they would let you in the door because you're a fan and you want to work there and you want your paycheck to say Pixar on top of it or whatever? Like, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
She didn't understand what I was asking. I was like, you have to figure out what you do. And so I think sometimes people think if they just get that paycheck or get in that door or work at the right company or work on the right kind of project, that all of a sudden there'll be some pixie dust that makes them a professional. And that just isn't true.
Yeah. I mean, that happens a lot I can't tell you creative teams I've been on where somebody's like, "I just want to be a creative director," or something like that. And it's like, okay, good. Here you go. Like, how's it feel? And you're like, "Oh, I thought the title would help me." It's like, title doesn't do anything. The title just hopefully makes a lot of people go like, they'll listen to you a little bit more. But like, it's the only cure I've ever seen for anxiety when it comes to work is craft. Like, there's no amount of like whatever your paycheck says or any of that stuff is not going to bail you out when you're really stuck. And so if you were to say like, let's start at the top, like, what's the big one? What's the big marker, big difference that you've seen between when you think about the folks you work with and the work you're doing, right? Where you go like, this is professional work versus amateur. What's one of the big markers? What's top of mind for you?
To honestly be able to assess what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And to not run from your weaknesses. That's an amateur move, to run from your weaknesses.
We've talked about this before, but and I'm sure people have been listening to us for now a couple of years, I guess, which is kind of crazy to think about. But when we were at the con that one time, and you walked around and you were saying they stopped at hands, they stopped at, and you were
Right.
pointing out where they stopped,
Yeah.
right? Because they didn't want to confront it. But then you've also talked about a guy like Glenn Keane, who's also going to be on the show, which is amazing, where he was like, you were talking about Beauty and the Beast and how he said he'll only do it if he can focus on feet and hands, because that's what scared him.
Yeah,
Right.
he said he doesn't take a job unless he's a little afraid he can't do it, right? Which is a lot of great actors have said that too. Jack Lemmon said that that if something scared them, if the part scared them, then they would take it because there was something in there they were afraid they couldn't do. If you know you can do it, then what happens is I don't think you try as hard. I don't think you reach as far. Some of the best performances have been by the second choice actor, and they often win an Oscar, right? Like, we couldn't get so-and-so, so we got so-and-so. And because for instance, I remember when Jack Nicholson was cast as the Joker for the Tim Burton Batman in the 80s. And everybody was like, oh, he's perfect. He's perfect. Jack Nicholson is perfect. And so when I saw it, I was like, well, he's just being Jack Nicholson. Like, he's not bringing it. Like, I know he can bring it. He's got all the skill set to bring it. But he didn't bring it. He sort of, I think, let his reputation do the work in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Check. He collected the check. And nothing against collecting the check. I don't mean that, but I don't think he would have worked. Somebody else would have worked harder. Somebody not perfect would have worked harder.
Yeah, he didn't take a lot of risks, right? That you see in his other pieces when he was earlier pieces, like the Cagney style, big risks.
Right.
I want to go back real quick, Brian, because I want to make sure I don't want to gloss over what you just said. You said they can't do a self-assessment, pretty much, strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
Can you give me an example of what you mean by that?
Sure. So dialogue's a big one. There are people, writers I've known, who say they're good at dialogue. Almost nobody who says that is, but I'll talk about that in a second. But they say they're good at dialogue, or they think they're good at dialogue, and so they make dialogue the centerpiece of what they do. And when you say you don't have a story, they go, I don't want to hear anything about that. Look how witty this banter is between these two people, right?
Yeah.
They are not doing a self-assessment. They aren't saying, for instance, let's just say you are. Let's say you're a master at dialogue, whatever that means. It means different things to different people. It means something different to me than it does to most people. But let's just say you were a master of dialogue, of saying, having people say clever things or funny things or smart things or poignant things or whatever it is. If you're already good at that, you don't need to work on it. So what's your weakness? Well, I'm not good at scenes. My scenes just seem to lay there. Well, then you should figure that out. That's what a professional does. They figure it out. But often and
by figure it out, you mean you go head on. You assess the weakness and you go directly at it.
Yeah.
You don't try to cover it up. You just go right. Like the fact that a guy at Glenn Keane's level goes, well, this scares me. I got to do it. There's somebody going directly. It's knowing the truth about yourself, being honest with yourself, and then going directly at the problem.
Actually read an article. I don't know where it is now. It was on the internet someplace. But this is years ago, about excellent students, like consistently A student people who really excelled, and that they would do that they would go for the hard thing, that they would always see, oh, that's hard for me, and go after it. I just think that's how you get good. Everything else is a trick that you use because you have particular talent for it, or an aptitude for it, or you don't hate it. It's fun for you to do. And so you get better at it just because it's fun for you to do. But like you said about going to the con and seeing where people stop, people often stop when the fun becomes work, right? Often, so they go, well, it was fun up until I had to learn how to draw horses. And then I don't want to draw horses, or I don't want to learn perspective, so because that's too hard for me. So that's where I stop, and I'll hide behind it. I'll do all these other things so I don't have to learn that thing.
Wow.
And if you're good at something, you can hide behind it. You'll hide.
And the funny thing is, you're probably going to fool most people.
Oh yeah, yeah. So it works, right. But part of you knows that you're fooling people when you do it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we talk about this all the time. The whole like people mistake style for content all the time, right? Like it's not hard to fool the people. But it's like Amadeus, right? Where Salieri was good enough to actually know the difference between him and Mozart.
Right.
Right. And it's like, if you know, and you're being honest, if you're honest with yourself, you know that you do that thing that you call style to skirt the real issue, which is, you don't feel comfortable with it. That's that's an amateur thing. Right.
Right.
I mean, I remember you said one time, I don't remember if it was at the con or something. You said people say what they do is they call it style all the time. But I think you said something like, but it's not style because they can't repeat it or something like that. Oh,
right. I heard this a couple of times when I was a lot younger going to cons, and people would show their portfolios to the pros, and the pros would start telling you what you couldn't do, right? So the pros would go, well, this arm is too long and this is too short. You need to go do some life drawing. That's often the prescription. Do some life drawing. Go out and draw from life. You got to do that. And they'd say your anatomy is off. And younger people seem to be obsessed with style. And so that because the surface, kind of like what I was when I was like just looking at the surface of things, right? They just see the surface. So they'll say, well, that's my style about their anatomy or whatever. And these professionals would always say, well, it isn't your style because it's inconsistent. So over here you have a leg that's too short, and over here you have a leg that's too long. And over here you have it isn't your style, but you're pretending it is because you can't do these other things. You're trying to cover up with style, or use it as an excuse to not know what you're doing. And the people who excel, I mean, really excel. I don't mean flash in the pan, popularity, but I mean excel over time and get this sort of admiration of their peers, which is not why you should do it, by the way. But those people have the chops. Like those people have solid foundation and are always pushing themselves and getting better. And people can feel it. They feel the difference. They know the difference, especially over time. The stuff that doesn't work really fades over time because if you're all style, well, style is a moving target. What looked hip in the 80s doesn't look hip now. And what looked hip in the 70s doesn't look hip now, right? So it's a moving target. You can never hit that, right? So you might hit it for that moment. And if that's all you do, as soon as the time passes and there's a new style and there's always somebody hipper and younger doing the new thing, the next new thing. And that's a hard thing to keep up with. As you get older, it's harder to keep up with that because you're not getting the same inputs as somebody younger, right? Somebody younger is watching this cartoon and reading these things and doing that stuff. They're getting all their input is coming from a different place. And so you're just imitating hip. It's not coming from you, right? So, I find that when people like, I think I've talked about him before, but John Buscema was a, comic book artist who I really like. And he was popular for a long time, even though styles changed, because he could really draw. He could really draw. And so because he could really draw and because he knew how to tell the story with pictures and all those things, even though styles changed and his stuff looked probably by the end of his career, looked a little old fashioned or whatever, it still worked. And it didn't bother readers. And I think it's because he had a solid foundation. And I think if you have that, you can have the long career that Hitchcock had, that Billy Wilder had, you know, because you've got the chops where other people come and go.
Yeah. So we start number one, to make the leap from amateur to professional. One of the things you have to be able to be honest with yourself, figure out where the shortcomings are, and then go right at it.
Yeah.
Right. I also thought it was interesting that you said the answer is almost always like, you know, go out in the real world and draw. Like,
yeah.
Right. It's just funny of like, of course that's the answer, is like, look at nature and how things work. If you can figure out how to do that, it'll all make sense. It's like, that's the same thing we say about stories. Like, well, how do they happen in nature? Right. And you're like, oh, it happens like that. Well, what does that tell you? Does that tell you anything about how to do it well? Right.
Right. I just actually heard a writer talking about 3-act structure and saying that it was ridiculous and that he didn't believe it. And this is a writer of some note. But the thing is, it's like, what people don't understand, it's, again, like we talked about it, but it is how people talk and give information. And so it isn't a construct of literature or screenwriting or any of that stuff. It is the way we talk. And so if you don't understand that we're basing all of it on nature, then what you're left with is style. What you're left with is on the surface, or this choice or that choice because you think it's cooler or whatever. But there's something very natural at work, and if you embrace that, then I think your work is better.
And here's the funny thing: the way you just did that was in 3 acts.
Of course, it was.
You just said there was this writer I heard of. Once upon a time, there was this writer I heard of that said that 3 acts is BS. It doesn't actually work. But what he doesn't understand, that of course it works. And then you went into your argument phase. Now you're in your second act where you're like, for instance, they'll do this and this and this. And at the end, you brought it back. And it was like, oh, great. You want to understand 3-act structure? There you go. It's right there on display.
Right. People do it all the time. In fact, there's another, and I can mention this guy. I don't know him. But and he's a really good storyteller, is Ira Glass. And I don't know if we've talked about Ira Glass before, but Ira Glass is a really good storyteller. He's the This American Life guy, and when This American Life first showed up on the radio, because it was a radio show, it was really pre-podcast, I was obsessed with it, listened to it all the time. So a big fan of I remember when they were advertising it and saying, this new thing is coming on, and now it's an institution. And started the whole, I think, podcast thing. So this is not anything against Ira Glass, but there's a thing of him on the internet where he's talking about structure. He's talking about, he says, you know, stories don't work the way you've heard about, like not like what you heard in school. I'm paraphrasing, but he goes, you know, it's not, you start with a thesis statement and then you prove it. And then he goes, it's not like that. And then he said, well, like, he goes, the power of a story is so important. You could just start with that. You could just start with that. He goes, so he tells us, he goes, a man wakes up, not because he heard a noise, but it's quiet, almost too quiet. And he goes, so he creeps out into the hall and he starts saying, see, that's already interesting, right? I didn't start with that 3-act, that thesis statement and then move on. Like, but he totally did, right? He starts by saying, oh, it's not like what you heard in school. It's not, you make a thesis statement. That's not how it works. It works like this. So what did he do? His thesis statement was, you don't need a thesis statement.
Yeah.
Then he writes, like, it's so natural that a storyteller that good doesn't even know, he can't even explain himself without using that structure.
Stephen King in his book on writing does the same exact thing.
Yeah.
Where he's like, it doesn't work that way. Here's how it works. And I'm like, proposed argument, conclusion.
Right.
It would be nonsensical if you didn't do it. You'd be like, does that make sense to anybody else? You have to have a first act. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense.
You don't have context.
Because if Ira was sitting there on an interview and he just jumped into, a man wakes up. It's quiet. A little too quiet. He creeps down the hall. And somebody's like, what the hell's going on, Ira? Like, are you telling a story? What?
Here's the other thing, though. Even if he starts that way, even the story he told you it's too quiet, right? Oh, too quiet. What does that mean? So you already know there's going to be an answer to that. Why was it too quiet? Now you know you're listening because it's too quiet. He set that up. So even if he did start there, he couldn't help himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just funny that like nature, we talked about like even with architecture, like, Frank Lloyd Wright and folks like that would he would go walk the property and he would sit in the nature, like around where he was going to build something and go like, oh, I need the dirt's red, so the roof will be red. And like, he was taking it from the thing.
Yeah.
And that's why, his work obviously lasts. But okay. So the first one it's that assessment piece, right? Mm-hmm. The honest assessment piece, and the best people, the people that are really top of their game, the Patty Chayefskys and different folks like that, they actually do that. They'll assess their work and go like, boy, I'm scared of hands and feet, so I'm going to go right at it. Mm-hmm. What's the next one down the list where you go like, boy, if you're not doing this, you really got to think about what's stopping you from doing that.
Well, this is another assessment thing, and this is assessing your tastes. So sometimes what happens is we're influenced by something when we're young. And there's nothing wrong with that. That gets the ball rolling. That's great. But what I found is, there's a particular movie, and I won't get into it. I know people are going to ask me and bug me about it. It really doesn't matter what the movie is. But there's a particular movie that people who grew up on this movie think is amazing. And you cannot convince them otherwise. And people who were older when the movie came out, like I was a teenager when the movie came out, was like, no, we didn't like it because it's not good. And what I found is that people don't readjust. They go, it's good because I like it. They don't understand good as a thing all by itself. Your liking it doesn't make it good. It makes it fun for you and interesting for you, but quality is a thing you can measure. So that people don't understand. And so what happens is when they start to make exceptions, carve away exceptions, but I like this, but I like that, but I like this. It happens with me a lot where I will give somebody a cogent argument about, so I go, well, this is why this doesn't work. It's confusing because of this. I didn't know what was happening because of that. They set this up, but they didn't pay it off. They will often agree to that stuff, but go, yeah, but I like it. Well, okay, and that's fine, but don't call yourself a professional if you can't evaluate it honestly. And if you're going to pretend as if your taste is a marker of what quality actually is, because it isn't. It's a different thing. It's okay to have your taste. It's okay to have the things you respond to. It's not fair to say, you can't like that. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, if you can't say, you know why I like that? I saw it when I was 6 years old. But if you're not willing to go, you can keep your 6-year-old self liking that, but you go, as an adult and as a person who is a crafts person, I see what they didn't do well. I see that they weren't doing this well or that well or that well. But I've found that people get so attached to that stuff, they can't do it. They can't part with that stuff. It's too emotional. One of the things that I used to do when I taught more was, have people write down a list. I don't know if I ever did this with any class that you were in, but I have people write down a list. So. I have people write down a list of their favorite stories, favorite movies or books or whatever. And I don't look at the list because I don't want to evaluate it. And I don't want them to think that I'm evaluating their tastes or whatever. So they write the list and I ask them how the list makes them feel. And a lot of things. It makes me feel, wonder, or it makes me feel this, or it makes me, I have all these strong emotions about it. And then what I do is I have them rip the list up. And then I ask them how that makes them feel. And it doesn't make me feel very good to rip that list up. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say, you're going to learn something here. And those things may challenge the things you already think are great. And if you're not willing to let those things go, that will always be a blind spot for you. It will always be there as a blind spot because you'll carve out an exception for this, an exception for that, an exception for that. And all those exceptions will chip away at your ability to perform at your optimum pro level because you're making exceptions.
Yeah, you keep trying to find a way to get people to believe that, fill in the blank movie I was about to say when I was like, I'll start a bunch of shit, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it is a masterpiece. That's a really tough one because that emotional connection is hard, right?
Yeah.
But it seems like the big lesson there is like, hey, what got you here isn't going to get you there.
Right.
Right? Like I get it. I've talked about this on the show before. This is an easy one because most people haven't seen this and they won't lose their mind. But it's like, I remember I saw Flight of the Navigator in the theater and I thought it was incredible. Like, I distinctly remember, I don't know, I was 6 or whatever, being like, that was the best movie I've ever seen in my whole life.
Yeah.
And then my girlfriend in college, who's my wife now, was like, hey, it came out on DVD and you've talked about it before. I got it and I put it in, I was like, hell yeah. And I'm watching it, I was like, oh shit. And it sucks because I'm like, this is not, the ferns, it looks like it's just the whole you're just like, oh, it's like the Pee Wee Herman voice, all this stuff. And I'm just like, man, damn, that sucks. Right. And it's hard to do that. Like, I was going through a huge box of old DVDs and I was looking at all these like movies I had. And I'm like, dude, 90% of this box of stuff that I used to watch all the time isn't interesting to me anymore. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's really hard to do because you're like, what do you do? Especially if you have repped the person where you're like, fill in the blank filmmaker is the best.
Right.
And then you have to show up and tell your friends, it's like, I thought you were a huge fan of them. It's like, I was. But then I realized that Tim Burton's just an amazing art director. And then people will freak out and you'd be like, I mean, I love his art, but that doesn't mean, and they're like, you go like, dude, it's a hard process to go through. Like I told you, I have original Tim Burton stuff in here. And I'm like, I still like the drawings. Right. It's just, it doesn't hold that like canon idea anymore. Right. Yeah. And that's difficult. But both of the things you brought up are assessments.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's funny because you're talking about like, okay, a lot of this is honesty.
Yep.
Like, can you look at something subjectively? Can you look at a drawing, yours or otherwise, and say, you said something a second ago. You said that quality is a thing you can measure.
Yeah.
Can you talk that line right there? You're professionals know that quality is a thing you can measure. Is what I'm assuming you were going with that.
Yeah.
That there is a standard, right?
Yeah. Well, it can be. So it's in Invisible Ink in the very beginning of it, but I was reading a book about called the Craftsmanship of the One-Act Play, which is a really good book, which I just happened to find in a used bookstore randomly. It's written by this guy Percival Wilde in 1923.
Oh wow, I didn't know. Yeah, got it.
And there's some cool stuff in there, and he just somewhere in the book said, and I think it's his quote. I'm pretty sure. I don't think he was quoting anybody else. I think it was his quote, and it was that within every art is concealed a still greater art. And I think that a professional is looking at what's inside the art. It's sort of like what I was saying about Jaws, right? Oh, wait, that's not about a shark, because I was on my journey to looking inside to the art inside the art.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep, it's beyond the surface.
Yeah, right? So what's underneath? And so the ability to see what's underneath that makes the thing work, that is driving the mechanism, that becomes its own thing that you can measure. You go, well, the reason that this isn't working just like being a mechanic or something, right? It's the noise that your car is making is not the problem, right? Mm. It's a symptom of a problem. Right.
But that's the difference. The better you are at your job, the better you are at diagnosing the actual problem.
Yeah.
The majority of problems that I see, at least on the agency side, is people are trying to solve the problem that's not actually the problem.
Yep.
So you're like, oh, you think it's the tire that's making that squeaky noise, and you're like, that's not even coming from the tire, that's coming from the drivetrain or something, whatever.
Right.
And you spend all this time trying to fix a problem that you don't even have identified the actual problem yet. But boy, you sit down with a real craftsperson, and you'll be in the car for 2 minutes, and somebody will be like, oh, I know what it is. It's your fuel pump.
Yeah.
And you're like, how'd you do that? It's almost like supernatural.
Yeah.
Right. There's a bunch of folks in my family that are mechanics, including my dad. We're like, the people at the top of the game would just be like, you can even just describe the problem, and they'll be like, it's this. And you're like, how'd they do that?
Right.
The diagnosis piece is a marker.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know it so well that you can say, and I've been to movies with you where you'll be like, all right, do you notice this, this, and this? That's why it didn't work. Or you'd say, like, I know how to fix that. And I'd be like, how'd you fix it? And you'd be like, dude, you got to move this, this, and this. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, that totally makes sense. And it was like, how are you just pulling that out of your head? And you're like, same way a master mechanic can go, here's the problem. It's the ball bearings. You might think it's this, but that's not actually what's going on.
Yeah.
Right? Billy Wilder, if you have a problem in the third act, it's actually in the first act.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a huge part of it. Being able to see underneath, being able to see the mechanism, and the mechanisms are really what you're evaluating. So, and that's what you can measure, right? So you can say, it's funny talking about structure. A joke is such a good example of structure, a story joke. People think that it's the punchline that is the funny part of the joke. But that punchline will not land if the first act, everything you needed to establish to make that work, was not set up correctly. Right? That it doesn't matter. That punchline all by itself doesn't mean anything, right? But I thought you wanted eggs. What? Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean anything. It's all about how it was set up, right? So what somebody who knows what they're doing knows is they go, oh, the punchline, whatever, that's fine. We just need to know X, Y, and Z up front. And then this lands.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you think. It's just not a funny joke. It's like, no, it'll work. You just need to fix this part. And that's what pros can do.
Well, the funny thing is where else could you not see that's true? What I mean by that is, like, okay, you're talking to a master chef and you're like, the steak's amazing. And he's like, well, here's what you got to do. You got to be it has to rest for 45 minutes, become room temperature. Then you need to do this, this, and this. And if you want to get it that moist and then you go like, I don't think you need to do that. And he's like, what do you mean? Like that, it has to be room temperature, because when you're cooking it, as far as from like just even from like a chemical,
right?
You know, it's like you go like, if you're like, well, I just disagree. I don't think you have to do that. He's like, every other place,
right?
Like if you're with a chef and they take a bite of something, like we have a friend of ours who's like one of the best chefs in Seattle. If I'm sitting next to him and I'm like, this is really good, I'll be like, why is this good? And he'll be like, here's why it's good. See how they did this, this, and this. They can explain it.
Right.
And thin slice it. Whereas I just be like, I thought it was a good burger. But he's like, here's why it's a good burger. They didn't just do this. See how they took the time to do these things?
Right.
He could go in the kitchen and recreate what the other people just did.
Sure.
Just having tasted.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole nother level than just like, I was making burgers. This one turned out good. This normally doesn't turn out that good. That's luck.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. That's the other thing. That's a good point. Pros don't rely on luck. Right. Or they know how to harness luck. Meaning they create the atmosphere that creates luck. Right. So they go, they might have things on their, like Milk Call, who some people think was the best animator who ever lived, right? Milk Call didn't have anything in his office, nothing where he worked, except a Picasso on the wall, right? That Picasso was there for him to have a target to aim at, right? And it did something for him and inspired him.
Hold on a second. I didn't know that. You're saying Milk Call had just a Picasso on his wall so that
Picasso
he was
prints,
always
yeah.
had stuff. That's crazy.
He didn't have anything
I never
else.
heard that story.
Oh yeah, he wouldn't listen to music when he worked. He wouldn't. He goes, I can only concentrate.
He just
on
was
one
like,
thing."
that's the North Star.
Yeah.
I'm going until I get there. That's amazing.
Yeah,
Talk about you become like what you look at,
yeah,
right? If you
Yeah.
surround yourself with really amazing people, you're going to be amazing. If you surround yourself with dopes, like think about the fact that he did that. He had the discipline to look at Picasso all day.
right.
And because here's the beautiful thing about that guy. Look at what he did in the Jungle Book or something. It has nothing to do with Picasso.
Right.
But he's just like, that's where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to do it with a snake or a tiger or whatever.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I didn't know he was that focused. I didn't know he had like, it'd be like having a photo of Muhammad Ali or some badass. Like, it's like the fact that was in his thing.
Yeah.
And that's where he was going. He wasn't trying to be good enough to sell prints or be good enough to get a booth at the con. He's going to Picasso.
Right.
And it's like, well, that's why he ended up being, that's really good. I didn't know that.
Yeah. But what that means is he knows what inspires him.
Mm-hmm.
He knew what was going to push him. Like that's, as far as he probably never reached that horizon line, it keeps moving, right? But he was moving somewhere and he was comparing himself to the best. That's another thing good people do. Good people compare themselves to the best. So, somebody wrote an article about this, about screenwriting, and they were saying, people will often see a movie and they go, I can write a movie that good. Well, that's the wrong attitude. I can write a movie that good. Well, it was a bad movie. That's why you think that, right? Why aren't you comparing yourself to the best stuff? Why aren't you, when I'm working, whether I hit the target or not is not important in a way. I'm looking at the best stuff. What is the best stuff? Because that's where I am aiming. That's where I'm trying to hit. A lot of times people see the best work and it intimidates them and it shows them what they aren't. Like, I can't do that. I'm not, so I'm not no call. I can never do that. And there are other people, and I don't know if it's chemical, I don't know if it's learned, I don't know what it is, brain chemistry, I have no idea. There are other people, and I happen to be one of these people who go, oh, that's possible. When I see good work, I just say that's possible. And some people are discouraged and others are encouraged. And I would encourage people to be encouraged.
There was a time when Billy Wilder wasn't Billy Wilder. He was just Billy.
I'm sorry?
There was a time when Billy Wilder wasn't Billy Wilder. He was just Billy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Without all the bullshit. Marcus Aurelius would do this where he would demystify things where he'd be like, that whatever brazened, calf, veal or whatever. He's like, it's just dead meat. Or he'd be like, that fancy bottle of wine. He's like, it's just fermented grapes. It's like when you can do that where you don't get caught up in all the bullshit and you go like, well, that's possible then. If you can watch that and a human being did that, it's like,
right.
Okay, well, what'd they do in order to be able to do that? Probably a ton of work to get that good. Right. But I love that your framework is if you see something that like Picasso, you go like, okay, well, at least I know it's possible. I'm not.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That should encourage you. And it doesn't matter whether you fall short of it or not. That's not important. If you're reaching, you will always be better than you would otherwise be. Right.
Yeah.
So, I've probably told this story before, but with August Wilson, we had a conversation once about, I was writing something and I was talking about how good I wanted it to be. And he was talking about how when he was trying to break in as a playwright, he was trying to get into a program. He was writing and working on and somebody said, what are you working on? And he told them, I'm writing this play. I'm trying to make it good enough to get into this program he was trying to get into. And they said, well, why aren't you trying to write the best play ever written? Why are you just trying to make good enough to get into this program? And he was like, oh yeah, why am I not doing that? And so then he said that was his shift to try to write the best play ever written. And that was his first play on Broadway, which is Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Right. So it was just the reaching for it. Like, oh, I'll write the best play ever written. Like that sounds crazy, and most people wouldn't do it. Most people would be like, well, I'm not going to do that. Right. Yeah. Well, then you've decided. It's like another thing I think I've talked about before is when somebody in my class, I was talking about how it's not luck because you can repeat it. You could be Billy Wilder and you could repeat it and you can have, hit after hit, classic after classic like he did. And this person scoffed and they said, well, that's Billy Wilder. And I'm like, oh, they just decided they can never do that. That's what they just decided. They decided Billy Wilder was some special being from another planet who had some abilities they don't have. And that's not the way professionals think. I don't think.
You just got a target.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like, this is my office, right? I got all these people on my wall. It's like Dorothy Booth and all these, Patty Chayefsky and, Kurosawa and stuff. Because it's that Picasso thing of like, oh, Dorothy Booth, I want her in my head, cut for emotion. I want, it's like, it's all those things where I just love that Picasso thing. It's just so great. I love that he's just going for it, in his way. And boy, what a great example of shoot for him. Go right at him. Yeah. If it's Picasso, don't hide it in your drawer. Put it right there. Yeah. So that everybody walks by, it's like, Milt, because there was a time when he was just Milt.
Right.
Milt, his Picasso thing or whatever. It's like, and he kept going.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is like, I mean, his work, it's one of those things, like we'll share those animations and stuff back and forth. You watch it and you're like, I don't know what, he's like magic. I mean, he could bring, like, it's like, it's unbelievable.
Your Shere Khan animation. And his Pinocchio animation is, to me, it blows me away, his Pinocchio stuff. He did Pinocchio sort of skipping to school, and so much joy in that. It looks so effortless. It's crazy. I marvel at it when I see it.
It's crazy.
I can't believe a human being drew that. Like, there's just a bounce that he has and a life that he has, and I don't know how he did that. It's amazing.
Wow. But he was also really hard on people, right? Like, he was going back to quality. Quality is the thing you can measure, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't the easiest guy to work with, right?
Yeah, he was not. From all indications are that he was not an easy guy to work with. But he held people to the standards he held himself to.
Yeah. So you go, okay. Number one, you have to be honest with yourself and go directly at the things that aren't there all the way, right? What got you here isn't going to get you there. You're going to have to let go of some stuff that is canon that maybe shouldn't be, right? And then that last piece you're talking about, we're really like, quality is a thing you can measure. Like, stop pretending everything is subjective, right? Like, there's a difference, and you can feel the difference when you see something and it's so well done. Like I told you about that phrase we were talking about. I think it was we're talking like this, so it's always hard for me to figure out what we're talking about. I know. But I was just talking about that episode of Frasier where it's the Christmas present he gets, and it was just like, I'm watching it, it's like, dude, and I was like, he slam dunks it at the end. I was like, God, these guys are good. Like, that just worked. There was everything about that worked. I mean, I was talking about Columbo a couple weeks ago too. It's like, it just works. I don't know. You can't take one thing away. It's like Jenga, right? You can't take a scene or a character or a word out of it and have it work. Yeah. You also don't need another character or another scene or another word. That kind of precision. I mean, I just marvel at it now. And it's
that's the art beneath the art, right? That's the art inside the art, right? That's what you're talking about, right? You're not just talking about the joke that lands or whatever, if the joke that lands also has everything to do with the story and everything to do with the armature and everything that the whole story has been leading to, that's a different kind of joke, right? And you can measure that. You can go, oh, that had everything to do with this piece. That's not just somebody saying a funny thing. Or if you structured everything correctly, you can make the smallest thing sad or funny or meaningful or whatever.
Yeah.
Set everything up correctly. It doesn't really matter what
it's the shoes in Jojo Rabbit. It seems like an insignificant thing, but man, it's just like finally, God, I remember watching that. I was texting you while I was watching it. I think you talked about the show. And I was like, have you seen what the hell is going on? And it's just like, it's so nice to watch somebody that's that good at their job.
Yeah.
And for me, it's emotional. Now.
Right. Yeah, it is emotional.
Like I'm watching that Frasier and he slam dunks it with the president at the end. If you've seen the episode, if you haven't seen the episode, it's the one where Frasier is getting a gift for his son who's coming into town, and it's between the whole thing is between him and his dad. And like he opens up the present. I knew it was going to happen, but man, when it hit, I was like, it's like watching, I don't know, Mozart or it's like watching somebody like ballet or something where you go like, my God, that's beautiful. It just works all the way around, and they're out at the perfect time, and they didn't need this, and this, and it's just like, it's wonderful, man. It really is like magic. It's like when you watch Pinocchio skipping, I don't know what you call that other than magic. Like craft, pure craft is magic. Yeah, that's what it transcends, and you go, what in the hell was that? Yeah, the first time I saw Van Gogh, I didn't grow up I grew up mostly at an army base. Like I'd never been in art museums and stuff. And I remember it was I think it was at the Guggenheim. You're coming around the corner, and it was like, I'd heard of Van Gogh, whatever. I come around the corner, and I saw it, and I just stood there, and I was like, what the hell is that? Mm-hmm. It was like, it was like, I don't know what that is, but I have to, what is that? Right? It's like, when someone's playing at that level, I got to see LeBron James one year. We were in Boston shooting that one thing, and so all of us accrue into the playoffs. And it was the game he broke the record. I was just watching LeBron play. It was like no one. He was by himself. Mm-hmm. He broke the record for the most points in postseason. So this was a couple of years ago. And just watching him play, I was like, I'm so glad I got to see King James play. Like to see somebody that good at their job. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful, man. It feels effortless. It feels like magic. Yeah. And it's a gift to give to the audience. It was a gift that everybody in that stadium got to see it. It's a gift that, if you watch Pinocchio now, like the cool thing about the Pinocchio example too is that like everybody of every age can enjoy it at different levels. You're noticing the craft stuff, but even if I watch it with Scout who's 6, she just likes it. But the cool thing is it works at every possible level. You can go deeper with that story. You can it's magic, man. It's the closest thing to magic I've ever seen.
Well, I used to, I knew a guy who worked, he was a comic book illustrator, and I would critique his work. He took me to the studio, or it was kind of a big studio, and he took me there, and I was like, well, he was showing me some pages, and I'm like, well, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand which panel comes next, and there were things I didn't understand about the art he was doing. And his response to me was, oh, kids don't care. Which was not the response that Milt Kahl would have had. Right? So that's why you know Milt Kahl's name, and you won't ever know this person's name. Glenn King doesn't think that. Glenn King didn't sit there drawing a Little Mermaid going, well, this is just for kids. I don't have to, I can phone it in a little bit because it's for kids. Professionals don't think like that.
Okay, so let's do 3 at least, because just for the sake of time. First one, it's that honest assessment of where you're at, and go directly at it. Go directly at the problems you're seeing, and you'll thank yourself for that later. Yep. Like stop bullshitting yourself. Mm-hmm. The hands are in the pocket because you can't draw hands, right? Right. It's like the acting's flat because you don't know how to direct actors. That's okay. You can learn how to do that. Right. Just it's just hard, and that's all right. But you don't even have a chance to learn it if you're bullshitting yourself all day long. Right. What got you here isn't going to get you there. And that last one, let's go deeper on that last one, which is really understanding the audience. Like the fact that you're saying Milt would care, right? But this other person wouldn't care. Right. Right. Why do you think Milt would care about the fact that it was for kids? Like the kids would know, or the kids wouldn't notice? Well, because
he wasn't doing it for them, right? In that way. He was doing it. It's a strange thing. The craft, you honor the craft. if you honor the craft, you'll honor your audience. If you honor the craft. So what Milt was giving was his best. I'm going to give my best to this. Well, how long has Pinocchio been entertaining kids?
Yeah.
Right? Like, so doing that did speak to his audience and spoke to an audience past his life, probably.
Oh, and he would have never known about DVDs and all the stuff that would come later. And
yeah. So he didn't know that all these years later, people would be talking about his work like this. That he would still have fans, maybe more fans than he had when he was alive. Right? As more people know who animates things, you know what I mean? People didn't know that stuff before in the way they do now, right? And so he may have more fans. He certainly has a bigger audience than he could have ever anticipated, right? Jungle Book and all that stuff that he worked on, and Pinocchio, he was just honoring the craft and doing the craft. It reminds me of the Shakers. You know the Shakers?
Yeah. And
Shaker Furniture. Like,
yeah, but you want to set that up for folks that don't.
Yeah, so Shakers are like a religious sect. If you've heard of Quakers, I think they're similar to Quakers. And Shakers are known for how they, in fact, I think Ken Burns did a documentary about the Shakers, I think. And they're known for their furniture, which is beautiful furniture. Very simple. They're known for simple, elegant, beautiful craftsmanship. For them, they honor God by doing the best work, by trying to be perfect. For them, it's a religious thing to do work at that level, to honor God by being perfect or trying to be or aspiring to be. And so that their furniture is a reflection of that. And Shaker Furniture goes for a lot of money. If you want a Shaker chair or something, it's like it ain't cheap, right? Because everybody knows it's built well, and and all of that, and all the care that went into it. And I would say that there is a secular version of that. There's a secular version of almost a spirituality about honoring your craft, where it's something bigger than yourself. You're serving something bigger than yourself. And that's another thing I think pros do. They serve something bigger than themselves. Amateurs are all about themselves. Look at me do this. Look at the way I did this. I'm showing off here. I'm showing off there. But people who are really good at what they do, I would say it's as close to, there is a spiritual component, I think, to it. Because it's bigger than you. The people I know who I've known who are not reaching their full potential are people who always make it about them. They always make the work about them. I wanted to see this. I wanted to do that. I. I think about Milt Kahl's solution to the Pinocchio design, which was an unbelievably elegant solution, right? So they're trying to design Pinocchio, and they couldn't make him not scary. This puppet, they were trying to make this puppet likable, and they couldn't do it. Like, they did all these designs, and Milt Kahl was like, well, why don't you just design the boy first and then turn that boy into a puppet? Because you can make the boy appealing. You can do that. So do that and then make that into a puppet. You'll be fine. Right. And that's how they did it. That's how they designed Pinocchio. You couldn't get a cuter puppet than Pinocchio. Right. Yeah. Right. But it was a difficult design challenge.
He started at the end and worked backwards.
And he worked backwards. But he was
all these people do too. It's crazy.
Yeah. But he was serving something bigger than himself. He wasn't trying to, he looked at the problem and tried to solve the problem in and of itself. He wasn't trying to get his designs in or get his ideas in or make it about him. He's like, you should approach the problem this way. Right. And I think you can look at that and say they solved that problem. You know?
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So, man, it's amazing how much of this is psychological. It's like, be honest with yourself in your assessments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, be willing to walk away from things when they're no longer useful or helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a pacifier is really helpful when you're a baby, but if you still have a pacifier when you're 30, it's like, why are you still holding on to that?
Yeah.
Right. And then that last one, you got to do it for something bigger. This is a frustration you and I have with a lot of the work we do when we're not doing this, right? Where it's like some people, they just want to get good enough at story to impress the friends at the office, or get good enough at story to, get a raise or whatever. It's like, don't you understand we're talking about magic? Like, don't you understand that we're talking about the storytellers are writing the code for the next generation? Like, don't you understand we're talking about as a species, how do we survive and how do we genuinely help each other? Like, and it's like, yeah, I'm not interested in that. I just want to be able to fool most people. And it's like, wow, that's same thing though. It's about you. It's like, understand that you're playing with fire.
Yeah.
Right. And you can do a lot of amazing things with fire, but you can also do destructive things with fire. Like, understand that, have some reverence in what you do, with what you do. And the Quakers do that. But the funny thing, if you can do that with a chair, you can certainly do that with a film. And
Right.
you could certainly do that with think about the great chefs. If you can do that with a sandwich, you could certainly do that with a story.
Yeah.
Think about the care that other craftspeople, whether, again, food, furniture, whatever you want, architecture, whatever it is, think about the care they put into what they're putting in the world, right? So you can certainly do that with the story you're going to tell later on today.
In a lot of ways, a really good example is when you talk about chefs. A really good chef, when they talk about food, because food is to serve to people, to give to people, right? It is about giving of yourself, and it is about serving something bigger than yourself. It literally is for other people. Literally for other people to consume.
Yep.
Literally is, right? And in fact, even the best home cooks, that idea that, well, it was made with love, that's a real thing. That's a real thing, and you know the difference, right?
Yeah.
It was made with love. Well, that means it was made with a certain kind of care, and it was made to serve something bigger than that person who was making that thing.
Yep. It's
My
not just a
grandmother
pie.
It was made with love.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Oh, well, it's delicious. Of course it is. Of course it is. Love is an actual ingredient.
Yeah.
Right? It's an actual ingredient. And you can have a love of craft, and that's an actual ingredient, and it comes through.
It's almost like, Brian, it's like, what if hard wasn't bad? At some point we started equating, oh, that's hard with that's bad.
Right.
Like if you look at, like, I don't know, samurai sword, people make samurai swords, like the craftsmanship, it's like, wow, that's really hard to make a chair that way. It's like, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But why is that bad? Like, it's really hard for Milt to do that sequence you're talking about. It's like, well, sure, but why is that bad?
Right.
Right. It's like, well, it's really hard to learn how to do hands and feet. And you're like, okay, what if just psychologically? The other day, Andy and I were, Andy also works here. We were downtown and we were going to this thing we were going to shoot, and it started just drenching on us. Like, the rain was coming down like crazy, and I was like, you got to be kidding me, man. And they're doing this whole thing because of COVID where you have to use an app and you can't just pay for the parking spots downtown,
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, we're late for this client meeting stuff. And it was like, hold on a second. What if this was the best part of the day? What if we just decide this will be the best part of the day? It's like, yeah, we could stand outside. It's raining. We're alive. Oh, and they start looking around. Like, it's actually really beautiful down here. I haven't been downtown in a little while. And they're like, all of a sudden you go like, what if you just decided that hard isn't bad?
Right.
Like, what if you decided like, oh, it's really hard? It's like, okay.
Right.
Right. And you just go like the craft side and getting better, better, better. What if you made that fun?
Mm-hmm.
You know what's awesome is I look at the hands I was doing 6 months ago and I look at the hands I'm doing now, I can see the difference. That's fun. Like I'm looking, like it doesn't just when we talk about craft. I think that it's easy to go to like, well, that's going to be fucking miserable or something. It's like, why?
Right.
Why can't that be a fun thing to get better?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Or maybe it's not fun. Like
there's other reasons to do things.
Right. That's what Frank Darabont said, right? When somebody said it couldn't have been that much fun writing Shawshank Redemption. And he was like, well, there's other reasons to do things. That's real. It's not always going to be fun. And if you expect that, sorry, right? Sometimes that comes later when you look at your progress.
Yeah.
Right? When you go, wow, look what I used to be able to do and look what I can do now. Wow, that's amazing. But yeah, it may not be fun. It may be nothing but work for a while. I was reading an interview with John Williams. There's not enough interviews with John Williams. I would sure like to get him on Masters of the Craft. I would love to talk to that guy. Just about his simplicity and the way he thinks. But he was something I was reading. He was talking about the Raiders theme, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Indiana Jones theme. And he's like, it takes a long time to come up with those notes. It takes a long time to come up with something that sounds inevitable. It's like, yeah, I bet it does.
That sounds inevitable. That's so good.
Isn't it?
Yeah. It sounds inevitable. That's what Frasier did. You knew it was going to happen. It didn't matter.
Right.
It was so well done. It sounds inevitable. That's an awesome way to say that.
Yeah. So you just go, well, yeah, sure, Indiana Jones has that theme. Why? Of course. Like, yeah, but some guy sat at a piano for hours, right? Trying to figure out what that should be. He did the same thing with Star Wars. He did the same thing with Superman.
And John Williams is a good example too, because it's about the difference between, here's the last, how about this is the last one. There's between an amateur to professionals. Professionals can do it over and over again.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good one.
I think the reason why we first met was because I would do like a campaign and it would be great. And then the next one's would be like next 3 or 4 be okay. And then I have another one that was just luck and gut and all that stuff. And then it was like, Brian, I got to figure, it's consistency. Like, how do you stop running off of luck and happenstance and be able to consistently, maybe they're not all home runs, but you're always going to get, on base. Like, for a fact it's going to work. Right. Sometimes they come together and there's something extra that's, but it's like that consistency. Yeah. That's the mark of, a guy like John Williams, obviously. Right. I mean, my God, can you think of a more consistent person?
No. Well, the other thing too is, sometimes things just gel and it's like, whoa, why is that? But almost always, all that really means is everything is pointing in the same direction, right? When it doesn't work, there's a shot in there that shouldn't be there because somebody loved it. There's a thing in there, right? All those things chip away at the integrity. But when you can get rid of all that stuff,
yep.
Right? We did a piece like that. We sat down, me and Andy, and worked this piece out. And I was like, get rid of this close-up, get rid of it, get rid of it. And it hung on, and it hung on, and it hung on. And as soon as we took it out, the whole piece got better.
Yep.
Yeah. The whole piece got better. And it's like, because it didn't belong. And people get attached to things and they think it's helping and it isn't helping. And I would say that it's almost like you have to clear the way for the magic to happen. Just get all the obstacles out of the way and then the magic will happen. But it doesn't happen. The more obstacles you put in the way, the less opportunity there is for that magic to occur. Right? You just have
more obstacles in the way, less opportunity for magic. Yep.
Right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. You're sort of in charge of it. And your ability to know when you're getting in the way, when something is a preference versus the right tool for the job. I like using this kind of drone shot. Is that helpful here? Right?
Mm-hmm.
No, but I like it.
Do we need it?
Yeah. Do we need it? No, but I like it. Well, okay.
Remember the difference between want and need.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, do you want a Rolls Royce or do you need one? Right. Like, there's a difference, right? It's like, you need to eat. Right. Right. You know what I mean? But a lot of times it's preferences or want or whatever. But Yeah, but man, so much of this, it sounds like, Brian, is just the ability to be really honest with yourself and just say, I know that you spent 3 days on that shot, but do you need it? And the greats would go, cut it.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I think it is about being honest with yourself and about where you are in your development. And if you're not where you want to be, knowing that's important, right? Well, this is where I'm going. And the truth of the matter is, I don't think you ever get there. You never get to that place. That forget about that. Everybody I know who's good is just trying to get better all the time. That's how they got good. And sometimes to the point where you're like, you can relax, you're good at this, and they can't relax. The thing that got them there is this never being satisfied with where they are. And so aiming for that Picasso print they have on the wall, like, I got to get there. I got to get there. I got to get there. Aiming at something, having a North Star, and that North Star being, I think, surrendering to the craft. For me personally, like, I think sometimes when I'm working with people, they read my actions in a way that, if they were behaving that way, it would mean this, so it must mean that for me. So it's like, if I object to something or doesn't, it's like, it's ego. It's like, no, my ego's not caught up in getting my idea in or anything like that. My ego comes into play. Like if I'm really proud of X or proud of Y. What I'm proud of is how I got out of the way. That's what I'm proud of. Like, and somebody's like, well, I don't know about this. I'm like, I got out of the way. That's what that thing wanted to be. I didn't do that. I surrendered totally to what it wanted to be. That's where I get, that's where my ego comes in. How well I do that. Because that always makes the work better. But the work is the outside, is the surface. That's the art on the outside. The art on the inside for me is all about surrendering to this thing that's bigger than you. For me, it's the craft. For me, it's the audience I'm communicating with. It's serving that food up with love, right? I have to serve that food up with love. I have to give something of myself to the work. And a lot of people aren't willing to give of themselves in that way. They're making a meal for themselves, and if other people want to eat it, that's fine. Right?
Yeah.
I'm making a meal for other people.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, because it's not about me. And I think that amateurs think it's about them.
That's a great place to end it. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thanks.
This program is produced in Seattle, Washington by Belief Agency.